September 4th, 2024, 10:20 a.m. In a high school hallway in Winder, Georgia, the ordinary noise of a Thursday morning, lockers, distant laughter, the scrape of chairs, was about to be replaced by something colder. A 14-year-old boy named Colt Gray stepped out of a bathroom stall. He wore yellow gloves. He held a white poster board against his torso, the way a child might hold a project for class. Behind that poster board, hidden until the moment it was no longer hidden, was the Christmas gift his father had given him 8 months earlier, a Sig Sauer M400-style semi-automatic rifle. He had brought 103 rounds into the building. In the next 6 minutes he would fire 36 of them. 2 teachers would die, 2 students would die, 9 others would be wounded. And the boy who pulled the trigger would already be calculating, even as the gun smoke still hung in the air, how long his name would live in search results. Your crimes do reflect permanent incorrigibility, and I will sentence you to life without parole for each of the malice murders you committed. This is not a story told for the thrill of violence. This is the story of a sequence of failures, so ordinary, so human, and so cumulative, that by the time the first shot was fired, they had already become inevitable. It is the story of a boy who studied mass killers the way other children study athletes or musicians, obsessively, devotionally, with notebooks full of coded references and a bedroom wall that functioned as a shrine. It is the story of a father who handed his son the weapon after clear warnings, after an FBI tip, after visible mental health decline. It is the story of a school that received partial alarms on the morning of the attack, and still lost the wrong student in a name mix-up that sounds almost fictional until you understand how easily it happened. It is the story of an online subculture that treats notoriety as a form of immortality, and of a 14-year-old who decided that immortality was worth other people's blood. And it is the story of a courtroom, nearly 2 years later, that had to answer a question the Supreme Court has made deliberately difficult: when, if ever, is a juvenile permanently incorrigible? Stay with me for the next 3 hours. We will walk the hallway in real time. We will open the notebooks. We will sit in the courtroom. We will listen to the families who no longer get to hear ordinary voices. And we will ask, without flinching, how many more warnings will be filed away before the next Christmas gift becomes the next 6 minutes? How many warnings were ignored? What does permanent incorrigibility mean for a child? Who failed first? Apalachee High School sits in Barrow County, Georgia, roughly 45 miles northeast of Atlanta. On ordinary days, it holds about 1,900 students. The building is modern enough. Classroom doors lock automatically once closed. Teachers wear identification badges equipped with panic buttons that had been issued only a week earlier. Georgia law requires at least 1 active shooter drill every year by October 1. The systems were in place. On the morning of September 4th, 2024, none of them were enough. In the first period, a teacher noticed 2 details that should have stopped the day. Colt Gray's backpack was unusually heavy, and the boy asked a question that cut through the ordinary noise of a classroom. How would the school respond to an active shooter? The teacher sent an email to administrators. The second period algebra teacher, the teacher in whose classroom the shooting would begin, never saw that email. At 9:42 a.m., Colt Gray sent a text message to his father, Colin Gray. The exact words, preserved in court records: "I'm sorry, it's not your fault. You're not to blame for any of it." Colin received the message. He called Colt's maternal grandmother. The grandmother was with Marcy Gray, Colt's mother. Marcy began calling and texting her son. No answer came. Sometime after 9:45 a.m., when second period algebra had already begun, Colt asked for a hall pass to see the school counselor. Around the same moment, another student in the same classroom, also surnamed Gray, first name Colton, asked permission to leave as well. Both boys walked toward the same bathroom. At 9:50 a.m., Marcy Gray called the school. She used the phrase "extreme emergency." She urged staff to check on her son immediately. The school counselor told her that Colt had talked about a school shooting that morning. School resource officers were alerted. They began searching. They found the bathroom. They found a boy named Gray. They escorted the wrong one to the front office. Colt Gray remained inside a stall. For nearly 20 minutes, the search continued around him while he prepared. He put on the yellow gloves. He arranged the white poster board around his torso. The rifle, brought into the building that morning inside the heavy backpack, was now ready. At 10:02 a.m., he sent his mother a second text. "I'm sorry." At approximately 10:20 a.m., he approached the door of his algebra classroom and knocked. A student rose to open it. Through the small glass panel, she saw the gun. She stepped aside and told the teacher, quietly but clearly, "He has a gun." Colt moved to a nearby classroom. He fired between 10 and 15 rounds in roughly 7 seconds. 14-year-old student Christian Angulo was killed. He moved into the hallway. Math teacher and assistant football coach Richard "Ricky" Aspinwall, 39 years old, stepped out of his classroom to investigate the noise. He was shot in the chest. His students pulled him back inside. They pressed their own shirts against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. He did not survive. Math teacher Cristina Irimie, 53, was killed. Student Mason Schermerhorn, 14, was killed. 7 people were struck by gunfire. 2 more were injured indirectly in the chaos. Colt Gray had brought 103 rounds. He fired 36. Multiple teachers pressed the panic buttons on their new identification badges. The school's lockdown software activated. Interactive whiteboards across the building flashed the words "Hard Lockdown" in large red letters. Some students, seeing the ambiguous message, believed it was only a drill. In one classroom, health students barricaded the door with chairs and desks. In another, a geometry teacher flipped a desk over to block the entrance. A chemistry teacher locked the door after a colleague shouted a warning. Students ran to the back of the room. Someone outside knocked and shouted to open up. Then the knocking stopped, and the gunshots and screams continued. School resource officers engaged Colt Gray within minutes. He surrendered. Students were evacuated to the outdoor football field. Many later described walking past abandoned backpacks, phones, and shoes. Some saw police attempting to shield a body. Some saw blood. While the evacuation was still underway, one man still believed the boy they had been looking for was already safe in the front office. The mix-up with the similarly named student had bought Colt Gray the time he needed. The heavy backpack had been noticed. The question about active shooters had been asked. The mother's emergency call had been made, and still the 6 minutes happened. Long before the morning of September 4th, Colt Gray had already chosen the version of himself he intended the world to see. In May 2023, when he was 13 years old, the FBI's National Threat Operations Center received anonymous tips about a Discord account. The username was a Russian transliteration of Lanza, the surname of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooter. The account posted statements of intent to commit a school shooting. It also posted a photograph of a rifle and a shotgun. Agents traced the email address associated with the account to Colt Gray in Georgia. Jackson County deputies visited the family home, then located in Jefferson. Colt denied making the threats. He claimed the account had been hacked months earlier. Neither he nor his father recognized the email address the FBI had traced. The deputy who responded had not been able to open the full evidence package, screenshots and images, on his phone. The case was closed. The FBI later stated there had been no probable cause for arrest or further action at the local, state, or federal level. Jackson County authorities told the FBI they would alert area schools and monitor the boy's behavior. After the 2024 shooting, no evidence was found that such a notification had ever been sent. In the months that followed, Colt constructed what investigators described as a shrine of sorts in his bedroom. Photographs and newspaper clippings of mass shooters were arranged on the wall behind his computer. Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, featured prominently. He wrote on Discord more than a year before the attack, "I want to make history. I want people to remember the pain I caused and research me for hours." In the days immediately before September 4, he wrote of his love for Nick becoming something for which he could find no other resort that can prove my love and affection towards him. He left a notebook behind in the algebra classroom when he went to the bathroom that morning. Investigators later recovered it. Inside were coded references, Easter eggs, to other mass shooters. After his arrest, in recorded jail telephone calls played in court, Colt asked his mother to search his name online and bring him fan art. He told her, "I'm in the big leagues, bro." And not in a bad way. Forensic psychologist Kevin Richards testified during the sentencing hearing that Colt's paranoia, depression, and anxiety were genuine and had been worsened by neglect at home and by immersion in online communities that fetishize mass shooters. On cross-examination, however, Richards stated that Colt had exaggerated symptoms and fabricated certain details in an apparent effort to obtain a more severe psychiatric diagnosis. There was no evidence of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, mania, or true hallucinations. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, during an interview with investigators less than an hour after he surrendered, Colt sobbed and gasped. He apologized. He offered paranoid, almost hallucinatory explanations, claiming teachers had been plotting against him. Several of those statements were later proven false, including claims about where he obtained the firearm and whether he had called a suicide hotline. One investigator later described the hysterical presentation as performative. The motive, the evidence ultimately showed, was not primarily psychosis. It was the pursuit of notoriety inside a dark online subculture that treats mass shooters as a kind of dark aristocracy. Colt Gray did not want to die that morning. He wanted to be studied. The home that produced Colt Gray was described by his maternal grandmother, Deborah Paulamus, as completely dysfunctional. Mother Marcy Gray had struggled for years with drug and alcohol addiction. The family moved repeatedly. School records show Colt missed his entire 8th grade year and accumulated chronic absences. Family members later testified about his deteriorating mental health and the difficulty he had living with both parents. Candace Broach, director of the Georgia Division of Family and Children Services, testified that the parents presented a plethora of issues related to child abuse and neglect. After the shooting, Colt was placed into emergency foster care when his mother violated a court order limiting her contact with him. His grandmother was named guardian. Staff observed that with medication and distance from his mother, he began eating better, sleeping better, and engaging more with programming. But the most consequential decision had already been made months earlier. In December 2023, Colin Gray purchased a Sig Sauer M400-style semi-automatic rifle and presented it to his 14-year-old son as a Christmas gift, along with ammunition, a sight, and other shooting accessories. According to Colin's own later testimony, he told the boy the gun came with rules. It was for the range, and if Colt stayed in school and behaved, it would become his at 18. Prosecutors argued that Colin knew the risks. He knew about the 2023 FBI visit. He knew about his son's mental health struggles. He knew about the shrine on the bedroom wall. He left the rifle accessible anyway. In the weeks before the shooting, Marcy Gray sought crisis counseling for their son. According to her testimony at Colin's trial, Colin was not supportive of those efforts. On the morning of September 4th, after receiving the first "I'm sorry" text, Colin's response was delayed. By the time the scale of what was happening became clear, the violence was already over. A jury in March 2026 found Colin Gray guilty of second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and second-degree cruelty to children. On July 30, 2026, just 2 days after his son's sentencing, Judge Nicholas Prim sentenced Colin to 15 years in prison. Sentences on the various counts were ordered to run concurrently. The judge's words were blunt. He called Colin a failed parent. He noted that Colin had not obtained mental health counseling when it was obvious the boy needed it. He had not removed the guns from the house. "Two scenarios," the court effectively said. "You fail the same way in both." The sentence was lighter than the 80 years prosecutors had requested and heavier than the defense had hoped for. It joined a small but growing line of cases, most notably the Michigan Crumbly parents. that treats certain forms of parental negligence around firearms as criminal when mass death is the result. Whether 15 years constitutes justice remains a matter of public argument. The court has spoken. The dead do not get to speak at sentencing, their families do. Richard "Ricky" Aspinwall was 39 years old, math teacher, assistant football coach, the man who stepped into the hallway because something sounded wrong. His students dragged him back into the classroom and pressed their own shirts against the wound in his chest. He died anyway. Cristina Irimie was 53, math teacher, known by students as steady, kind, present. Mason Schermerhorn was 14, Christian Angulo was 14. In the sentencing hearing that began after Colt's guilty plea, the courtroom heard what those four names had meant while they were still attached to living people. Nautica Walton, who was in 9th grade when she was shot in the leg, stood and looked at Colt Gray. I started to hate myself because I couldn't truly live anymore, because I let you take every piece of joy I had away from me. I hate everything about you. I hate the scars you left on my body. I hate that you took innocent lives in front of innocent people. Most of all, I hate that I let you live in my mind. Ismael Angulo Jr., oldest sibling of Christian Angulo, told the court, "The defendant's family will still get to see their son, talk to him, and know he is breathing. My mother and my father don't get that privilege. The only way to visit Christian now is by standing over his grave. There is no fairness in that reality." Mason Schermerhorn's mother told the court she does not forgive Colt Gray, but she knows he was failed by the adults in his life. These statements were not performances. They were the sound of lives permanently rearranged by 6 minutes of calculated violence. They were the sound of people trying to describe the shape of an absence that will never be filled. Colin Gray's trial in early 2026 became a national test of how far parental criminal liability can reach when a child uses a parent's gun to kill. Prosecutors argued that by purchasing the rifle and leaving it unsecured after clear warnings, Colin created the conditions that made the deaths possible. They asked for a sentence that would have totaled 80 years. The defense maintained that Colin loved his son, that he had set rules around the firearm, and that he could not have foreseen this exact outcome. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. At the July 30 sentencing, the judge imposed 15 years, concurrent across the counts. He told Colin Gray that none of his failures helped his case. He had failed to get counseling when it was obvious. He had failed to remove the guns. The case sits alongside the Michigan Crumbly prosecutions as part of a slow legal shift. The idea that certain forms of parental negligence around firearms can rise to the level of criminal responsibility when mass death follows. Whether that shift produces fewer tragedies or simply more prison sentences is a question still unfolding. On July 24, 2026, Colt Gray, now 16 years old, pleaded guilty to all 55 charges against him, including 4 counts of murder. The 3-day sentencing hearing that followed featured victim impact statements, the playing of his post-arrest interview, psychological testimony, and 2 competing visions of who he was and who he might become. District Attorney Brad Smith told the judge that Colt had carried out the attack to become famous inside a twisted online subculture. He's the only one in the history of Georgia who has ever taken an assault rifle into a public school and opened fire on perfect strangers simply so he could be famous. Defense attorney Charlton Allen emphasized the defendant's age and the trauma of his upbringing. He argued that life without parole is too harsh for any teenager, and that Colt was not irretrievably broken. Judge Nicholas Prim was bound by Supreme Court precedent, holding that juveniles may receive life without parole only in rare cases of permanent incorrigibility. After hearing the evidence, he found that this was one of those rare cases. "Your crimes do reflect permanent incorrigibility," he said, "and I will sentence you to life without parole for each of the malice murders you committed." Colt Gray showed no visible reaction. He declined the opportunity to speak. In the gallery, families gasped and wept. The boy who had written that he wanted people to research him for hours now has a permanent public record that will never include the possibility of release. The failures were sequential and human. An FBI tip that never fully reached the officers who needed the complete evidence package, a school that received partial warnings on the morning of the attack and still lost the wrong student in a name mix-up, a state that, at the time, had no child access prevention law and no red flag law, a home where mental health decline was visible and the most dangerous object in the house was left within reach, an online ecosystem that rewards the fantasy of notoriety and gives lonely, angry adolescents a ready-made script for how to become infamous. None of these facts excuse the shooter. All of them explain how a preventable morning became inevitable. Georgia has since seen renewed debate on school security, parental responsibility, and the pathways of online radicalization. Whether those debates produce lasting structural change is a story still being written in legislatures and school board meetings and living rooms. 4 families will never again hear the ordinary voices of the people they loved. A 16-year-old will grow old inside concrete walls he chose for the sake of a name that will outlive him in search results. And every school hallway in America still carries the same unanswered question: how many more warnings will be filed away? How many more heavy backpacks will be noticed too late? How many more Christmas gifts will become the instruments of the next 6 minutes? What do you believe was the decisive failure here? The father who handed over the rifle, the system that closed the tip, the internet that supplied the script, or something darker and more individual inside a boy who decided that history was worth other people's blood? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who still believes it can't happen here, and stay vigilant. The next story is already writing itself in some other bedroom, on some other Discord server, with some other parent who thinks the rules will be enough. In memory of Richard Aspinwall, Cristina Irimie, Mason Schermerhorn, Christian Angulo.